The silence was deafening after they walked out. 16 years old, staring at a refrigerator that was emptier than my future felt. My parents' laughter echoed in my memory, a cruel soundtrack to the beginning of my new life, a life they had so casually decided I wasn't a part of anymore. They said some distant uncle would handle everything, a name I barely recognized, a promise as hollow as their goodbye. They drove away, leaving me standing on the porch, the Florida sun suddenly cold on my skin, the weight of their abandonment crushing me, and a burning certainty that someday, somehow, they would regret this day. If you have a brother or sister who always has your back, subscribe now. The Uncle Silas turned out to be more of a guardian angel than a relative. He was quiet, unassuming, and wealthy beyond my comprehension. He enrolled me in a private school, not that I wanted it, and ensured I had everything I needed, though what I truly needed was a family who chose to stay. Silas never pried, never asked questions about my parents. He simply provided a safe harbor from the storm they had unleashed. I threw myself into my studies, fueled by a burning desire to prove them wrong, to become someone they couldn't ignore, someone they'd regret leaving behind. My name is Madison, and I wanted to make them choke on their regret. Silas encouraged my ambition, funding my education through college and beyond, always with a gentle smile and the quiet assurance that he believed in me. He taught me about investments, about business, about leveraging opportunity, skills I absorbed like a sponge, preparing for a future where I would never be vulnerable again. He became the father I always wanted, the one who saw my potential, not a burden. He filled the void they created, yet their absence still haunted me, a constant reminder of their callous rejection. Years passed. Silas's health began to fail. The man who had been my rock, my savior, was now fading, and the thought of losing him terrified me. I spent every possible moment by his side, listening to his stories, learning from his wisdom, soaking in the love he so freely offered. One afternoon, he called me into his study, his voice raspy but his eyes clear. He handed me a thick envelope, sealed with his personal crest. "For when I'm gone," he rasped. "Don't open it until then." I clutched the envelope to my chest, tears streaming down my face, knowing what it signified. The day Silas left this world was the day a part of me went with him. The reading of the will was a formal affair, attended by lawyers, distant relatives, and to my utter shock, my parents. They strolled in like they owned the place, radiating an arrogance that made my skin crawl. They hadn't changed a bit. My mother, with her perfectly coiffed hair and designer dress, and my father, puffing out his chest like a peacock, oozed entitlement. They hadn't bothered to contact me to acknowledge my existence, yet here they were, expecting what? A thank you for abandoning me. The lawyer droned on, listing assets, properties, investments, the vastness of Silas's wealth becoming increasingly apparent. My parents shifted impatiently, their eyes gleaming with avarice. Finally, the lawyer reached the core of the will, the distribution of assets. Smaller bequests were made to various charities and distant relatives. Then came the bombshell. The majority of Silas's estate, the vast majority, was to be inherited solely by me, Madison. My parents erupted. "This is absurd," my father bellowed, his face turning red. "We are his closest relatives. We deserve a significant portion of this inheritance." My mother chimed in, her voice dripping with indignation. "She's just some child he took in out of pity. We are his family." Their words were like a slap in the face, a confirmation of everything I had always suspected. They didn't care about me. They only cared about the money. The lawyer, unfazed by their outburst, calmly explained that Silas had included a clause, a stipulation regarding any challenge to the will. Any attempt to contest the inheritance would result in the forfeiture of any claim to the estate, no matter how distant the relation. My parents scoffed, confident in their ability to manipulate the system. "We'll see about that," my father sneered, his eyes narrowing. "We'll get our lawyers involved. This isn't over." The person I trusted most was one of them. The lawsuit was a tsunami. It consumed everything. Sleepless nights became my new normal, the weight of legal documents pressing down on me like a physical burden. My parents, fueled by greed and a sense of entitlement, dredged up every skeleton in Silas's closet, every minor infraction, every perceived slight, twisting them into grotesque accusations designed to undermine his character and invalidate his will. They painted him as a senile old man, easily manipulated, claiming I had somehow coerced him into leaving me his fortune. Their lawyers were ruthless, dissecting my life with cold precision, questioning my motives, my relationships, my very worth. I felt exposed, vulnerable. The privacy Silas had so carefully protected now shattered into a million pieces. I tried to reason with them to appeal to some vestige of parental love, but their eyes remained fixed on the prize, blind to the damage they were inflicting. All we want is what's fair, my mother said, her voice saccharine sweet, a tone I hadn't heard since childhood. Silas was a good man, but he wasn't thinking clearly. Her words were a carefully constructed lie designed to mask their insatiable greed. My father simply glared, his silence more menacing than any threat. The legal bills mounted, draining Silas's estate, and I began to feel the crushing weight of responsibility, the fear that I would lose everything, not just the money, but Silas's legacy, his faith in me. I considered settling, offering them a portion of the inheritance just to make it stop, but my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Evans, vehemently advised against it. They'll never be satisfied, she warned. Give them an inch and they'll take a mile. They see you as weak, as an easy target, you have to fight. I threw myself into the battle, poring over documents, attending depositions, enduring endless interrogations. Ms. Evans was a formidable ally, anticipating their every move, countering their accusations with meticulous precision. But the stress was taking its toll. I lost weight, dark circles forming under my eyes, my once vibrant energy replaced by a weary resignation. The whispers followed me everywhere. People I thought were friends now looked at me with suspicion, their smiles strained, their conversations halting when I approached. The media picked up the story, portraying me as a gold digger, a manipulative orphan who had charmed her way into an old man's fortune. The online comments were brutal, vicious, filled with hatred and judgment. I felt isolated, alone, the weight of the world pressing down on me. One evening, after a particularly grueling deposition, I returned to Silas's house, now feeling more like a prison than a sanctuary. I wandered through the empty rooms, touching his belongings, trying to recapture the warmth and comfort I had once found here. In his study, I noticed something out of place, a small antique box I had never seen before tucked away on a high shelf. Curiosity piqued, I reached for it, my fingers brushing against a hidden latch. The box sprung open, revealing a stack of old letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. The letters were addressed to Silas, written in a familiar hand. My mother's hand. I sank into a chair, my heart pounding in my chest, and began to read. The letters chronicled a secret affair, a passionate romance between my mother and Silas that had taken place years before my parents' marriage. They spoke of love, of longing, of a child they had conceived together, a child my mother had given up for adoption. The pieces began to fall into place, the truth unraveling before my eyes. I wasn't just some random orphan Silas had taken in out of pity. I was his daughter. My parents' lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was about burying a secret that could destroy their carefully constructed lives. I felt a surge of anger, hot and intense, but beneath it, a cold, calculating resolve began to form. They wanted a war, they were about to get one. The next morning, I walked into Ms. Evans's office, a stack of letters in my hand. I laid them on her desk and told her everything. She read them in silence, her expression growing increasingly grim. When she finished, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and determination. "This changes everything," she said. "They've been playing a dangerous game. Now it's our turn." We spent the next few weeks meticulously building our case, gathering evidence to corroborate the letters, preparing to expose my parents' lies and reveal the truth about my parentage. Ms. Evans subpoenaed my parents, demanding they submit to a DNA test. They refused, claiming it was a violation of their privacy. But we persisted, filing motion after motion, until the judge finally ordered them to comply. The results came back a week later. The probability of Silas being my father was 99.99%. My parents' world began to crumble. The media frenzy intensified, their reputation tarnished beyond repair. Their friends turned their backs on them, their social standing evaporating overnight. But the lawsuit was still ongoing, their lawyers arguing that even if Silas was my biological father, the will was still invalid, claiming he was mentally incompetent when he signed it. They were desperate, clinging to any shred of hope, refusing to admit defeat. I knew I had to deliver the final blow. I had been silent for too long. It was time for my voice to be heard. I scheduled a press conference, inviting every major news outlet in the state. I stood before the cameras, my hands trembling slightly, and told my story. I spoke of my parents' abandonment, of Silas's kindness, of the lawsuit, of the secret affair, and of the DNA results that proved Silas was my father. I held up the letters, letting the cameras capture my mother's handwriting. I exposed their lies, their greed, their betrayal. The silence that followed was deafening. broken only by the clicking of cameras and the hushed whispers of the reporters. I had laid bare my soul, exposed my deepest wounds, and now all I could do was wait. The backlash was immediate and brutal. My parents, desperate to salvage their reputation, launched a counteroffensive, accusing me of fabricating the letters, of manipulating the DNA results, of exploiting Silas's memory for my own gain. They hired a high-powered PR firm to spin the narrative, portraying me as a heartless opportunist who had destroyed their family. The media ate it up. The online comments became even more venomous, the accusations more personal, more cruel. I was bombarded with hate mail, death threats, and relentless harassment. I couldn't go anywhere without being recognized, without being subjected to stares and whispers. I felt like a pariah, ostracized and condemned. The lawsuit dragged on, the legal battles becoming increasingly vicious, the financial strain pushing me to the brink. I started having nightmares, reliving my parents' abandonment, Silas's passing, the relentless attacks from the media. Sleep became a luxury I could barely afford. I was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained, teetering on the edge of a breakdown. One morning, I woke up to find my bank accounts frozen, my assets seized. My parents had filed an emergency motion, claiming I was squandering Silas's estate, that I was unfit to manage his legacy. The judge, swayed by their arguments and the relentless media coverage, granted their request. I was left with nothing, stripped of my resources, my power, my hope. I sat in Silas's empty house, staring at the walls, the weight of my failure crushing me. They had won. They had taken everything from me. I was alone, broken, defeated. The darkness closed in, a suffocating blanket of despair. I wandered through the house like a ghost, each room a painful reminder of what I had lost. Silas's study, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. I sank into his chair, the leather cold against my skin, and stared at the antique box that had started it all. The letters lay scattered on the desk, my mother's words mocking me from the pages. I picked one up, my fingers tracing the familiar handwriting, and read it again. Her words of love, her promises of devotion, now seemed like a cruel joke. How could she have betrayed Silas like that? How could she have abandoned me? And how could she be so ruthless in her pursuit of money, so willing to destroy her own child? A wave of nausea washed over me, and I stumbled to the bathroom, emptying the contents of my stomach into the toilet. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my face pale and gaunt, my eyes hollow and lifeless. I barely recognized myself. I had become a shell of my former self, consumed by anger, grief, and despair. Was this what they wanted? Had they finally broken me? As I stared into the abyss, a flicker of defiance ignited within me. They may have taken everything from me, but they hadn't taken my spirit. They hadn't taken my resolve. They hadn't taken my ability to fight back. A plan began to form in my mind, a plan born out of desperation and fueled by a burning desire for revenge. It was risky, it was dangerous, but it was the only way to reclaim my life, to honor Silas's memory, and to make my parents pay for what they had done. I straightened my shoulders, wiped the tears from my eyes, and walked back into the study. The letters were no longer weapons of despair, but tools of war. I gathered them up, a cold smile playing on my lips. The game had changed. I was no longer the victim. I was the strategist, their biggest weakness. They thought they were untouchable. I knew they felt safe in their world of privilege and influence, protected by their wealth and their connections. But everyone has secrets, everyone has vulnerabilities, and I was determined to find theirs. I started by digging into their past, meticulously researching their business dealings, their personal relationships, their hidden investments. I hired a private investigator, a discreet and resourceful man named Mr. Harding, to uncover any dirt they had tried to bury. He was expensive, but he was worth every penny. He unearthed a trail of shady deals, hidden assets, and secret accounts, revealing a pattern of fraud, tax evasion, and corruption. My parents were not the upstanding citizens they pretended to be. They were criminals, hiding behind a facade of respectability. The information Mr. Harding provided was damning, but it wasn't enough. I needed something more, something that would expose their true character, something that would destroy their carefully constructed image. I focused on their personal lives, scrutinizing their relationships, their habits, their weaknesses. I discovered that my father had a gambling problem, a secret addiction that had cost him millions of dollars over the years. He had been hiding it from my mother, borrowing money from questionable sources, putting their financial security at risk. My mother, on the other hand, had a different kind of secret, a long-standing affair with a prominent politician, a relationship that could ruin his career and her marriage. They were both living lies, their lives built on a foundation of deceit and betrayal. The more I dug, the more I realized how deeply flawed they were, how vulnerable they were to exposure. Their arrogance had blinded them to their own weaknesses, making them easy targets. They thought they were untouchable, but they were about to learn how wrong they were. I gathered the evidence, piece by piece, building a case that would shatter their world. I was meticulous, patient, and ruthless. I left no stone unturned, no detail overlooked. I knew that once I unleashed my plan, there would be no turning back. But I was prepared to pay the price. I was prepared to do whatever it took to get my revenge. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. I smiled, I played their game, but I was recording everything. I knew I couldn't directly confront them. They would deny it. I needed proof, undeniable evidence that would expose their lies to the world. My plan started with their phones. They were always on them, constantly texting, emailing, and making calls. They were addicted to their devices, and that was their weakness. I decided to bug their phones, planting spyware that would record their conversations, track their locations, and copy their messages. It was a risky move, illegal even, but I was willing to take the chance. I contacted a tech expert, a former hacker named Marcus, who I found through a dark web forum. He was hesitant at first, wary of getting involved in a family dispute. But after I explained my situation and showed him the evidence I had gathered, he agreed to help. He installed sophisticated spyware on their phones, disguised as a routine software update. They never suspected a thing. Now I had access to their every communication, their every secret. I listened to their phone calls, read their text messages, and monitored their locations. I was like a ghost, observing their lives from the shadows, gathering information that would eventually be their undoing. One evening, I overheard a conversation between my parents that sent a chill down my spine. They were discussing a plan to permanently silence me. My father, fueled by rage and desperation, suggested hiring someone to take care of me, to make me disappear. My mother, initially hesitant, eventually agreed, swayed by his arguments that it was the only way to protect their reputation and their fortune. I felt a surge of fear, realizing the gravity of the situation. They weren't just trying to win a lawsuit. They were trying to erase me from existence. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't wait any longer to execute my plan. I contacted Ms. Evans, my lawyer, and shared the recording with her. She was horrified, but also determined to use it to our advantage. She advised me to go into hiding to protect myself from my parents' reach. I refused. I wasn't going to run. I was going to stand my ground and fight. Ms. Evans, with the help of a forensic audio expert, authenticated the recording, ensuring it was admissible in court. She also contacted the authorities, informing them of my parents' plot. The police, initially skeptical, launched an investigation, placing my parents under surveillance. I needed more than just the recording. I needed to expose their financial crimes, to reveal their corruption to the world. I decided to leak the information I had gathered to the media, providing them with evidence of my parents' tax evasion, fraud, and secret accounts. I contacted a journalist, a seasoned investigative reporter named Sarah, who I knew I could trust. I met her in secret, at a secluded location, and presented her with the documents and recordings I had collected. She was stunned by the sheer volume of evidence and by the extent of my parents' criminal activity. She promised to investigate the story, to expose the truth to the public. I knew it was a risky move, that it could backfire and put me in even greater danger. But I was willing to take the chance. I had nothing left to lose. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah and her team worked tirelessly, verifying the information, interviewing sources, and preparing the story for publication. The police, meanwhile, continued their investigation, gathering evidence to support the charges against my parents. The tension was palpable, the anticipation building to a crescendo. I knew that the storm was about to break, that my parents' world was about to be shattered. The final piece of my plan involved the press conference. I had scheduled it weeks in advance, but I had been waiting for the right moment to deliver the final blow. The day arrived, and I stood before the cameras, my heart pounding in my chest. I had rehearsed my speech 1,000 times, but I still felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told my story from the beginning, recounting my parents' abandonment, Silas's kindness, the lawsuit, the secret affair, and the DNA results that proved Silas was my father. I then revealed the evidence of my parents' financial crimes, their corruption, and their plot to harm me. I played the recording of their conversation, letting the world hear their true voices, their true intentions. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the clicking of cameras and the hushed whispers of the reporters. I had laid bare my soul, exposed my deepest wounds, And now all I could do was wait. I watched as the news spread like wildfire, engulfing my parents' lives in flames. Their reputation, their fortune, their freedom, all crumbling before my eyes. They had tried to destroy me, but they had only succeeded in destroying themselves. The fallout was immediate. My parents were publicly disgraced. The news channels ran the story nonstop, dissecting every detail of their crimes, their lies, their betrayal. Their friends and associates deserted them, their social circle evaporating overnight. The police raided their mansion, seizing their assets, arresting them on multiple charges. They were denied bail, remanded in custody, their freedom hanging by a thread. The lawsuit was dismissed, the judge ruling in my favor, granting me full control of Silas's estate. I had won. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the pain and suffering I had endured. I knew that my parents' actions had consequences, that they had brought this upon themselves. But I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness, a sense of loss. They were still my parents, after all, and I had never wanted to destroy them. I had only wanted justice. The news of their arrest sent shockwaves through the political establishment. My mother's lover, the prominent politician, was forced to resign, his career in ruins. He denied any knowledge of her criminal activities, but the damage was done. His reputation was tarnished beyond repair. My father's gambling debts were exposed, revealing a network of shady lenders and underworld figures. He had put his family's financial security at risk, gambling away their fortune on a desperate attempt to recoup his losses. Their carefully constructed world had crumbled, revealing the rot beneath the surface. They were no longer untouchable. They were exposed, vulnerable, and facing the full force of the law. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a mixture of satisfaction and regret swirling within me. I had achieved my revenge, but it had come at a cost. I had lost my family, my innocence, and a part of myself in the process. Their desperation was now my weapon. I knew they would try anything to salvage what was left of their lives, to regain their freedom, to reclaim their reputation. And I was ready for them. I anticipated their every move, their every strategy. I knew they would try to manipulate me, to appeal to my emotions, to guilt me into dropping the charges. But I was immune to their tactics. I had seen their true faces, their true intentions. I knew they were incapable of remorse, of empathy, of genuine love. They were only interested in themselves, in their own survival. Ms. Evans, my lawyer, kept me informed of their legal maneuvers, their attempts to negotiate a plea bargain, their efforts to discredit me in the media. She advised me to remain silent, to let the legal process run its course. But I couldn't stay silent any longer. I had a story to tell, a truth to reveal. I decided to write a book, a memoir of my experiences, exposing my parents' crimes, their lies, and their betrayal. I wanted to share my story with the world, to inspire others who had been victimized, to show them that they could overcome adversity, that they could find justice, that they could reclaim their lives. I started writing, pouring my heart and soul into the pages, reliving the pain, the anger, the grief, but also the hope, the resilience, and the determination. It was a cathartic process, a way to heal my wounds, to make sense of the chaos, to find meaning in the suffering. I wrote about my parents' abandonment, Silas's kindness, the lawsuit, the secret affair, and the DNA results that proved Silas was my father. I wrote about their financial crimes, their corruption, and their plot to make me disappear. I wrote about my struggles, my fears, and my triumphs. I wrote about the power of forgiveness, the importance of self-love, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The trap was set. They thought they could outsmart me, that they could manipulate the system, that they could escape justice. But they were wrong. I had anticipated their every move, planned for every contingency. I had gathered the evidence, built the case, and laid the foundation for their downfall. All that was left was to spring the trap, to unleash the final blow. I received a call from my mother, her voice trembling, pleading with me to meet her. She claimed she wanted to apologize, to explain her actions, to make amends. I was skeptical, but I agreed to meet her, knowing that it was part of my plan. I chose a public place, a crowded restaurant, ensuring that there would be witnesses. I arrived early, taking a seat at a table near the window, watching as my mother approached. She looked frail, defeated, a shadow of her former self. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face etched with worry lines. She sat down across from me, her hands shaking, her voice barely a whisper. She began to speak, her words a jumbled mess of apologies, excuses, and justifications. She claimed that she had been under pressure, that she had been afraid of losing everything, that she had only been trying to protect her family. I listened patiently, letting her ramble on, knowing that her words were meaningless. I knew that she was only trying to manipulate me, to play on my emotions, to guilt me into dropping the charges. but I was unmoved. I had seen her true face, her true intentions. I knew she was incapable of genuine remorse. As she spoke, I noticed my father approaching the restaurant, his face grim, his eyes filled with rage. He stormed towards our table, his fists clenched, his body trembling. He began to shout, accusing me of ruining their lives, of destroying their family, of betraying their trust. I remained calm, unfazed by his outburst. I knew that this was exactly what I wanted. I wanted him to lose control, to expose his true character, to incriminate himself further. He continued to rant, his voice growing louder, attracting the attention of the other diners. He threatened me, insulted me, and even lunged at me, but I managed to evade his grasp. The restaurant staff intervened, restraining him, while I calmly called the police. He was arrested on the spot, charged with assault and harassment. My mother watched in horror, her face pale, her body shaking. She realized that she had been played, that she had walked right into my trap. The police arrived, taking my father into custody, while I calmly finished my coffee, a smile playing on my lips. The trap had been sprung. The game was over. But the final act was yet to come. As the officers led my father away in handcuffs, he locked eyes with me, and in that moment I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years: fear. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with reporters, onlookers, and rubberneckers eager to witness the final act of this family drama. My parents sat at the defendant's table, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes hollow. They looked like ghosts, haunted by the specter of their own crimes. The evidence against them was overwhelming. A mountain of documents, recordings, and testimonies that painted a damning picture of their greed, their lies, and their cruelty. The prosecutor, a seasoned trial lawyer with a reputation for being relentless, presented the case with meticulous precision, connecting the dots, exposing the inconsistencies in their stories, and demolishing their defense. My mother tried to maintain a facade of composure, but her hands trembled as she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. My father, on the other hand, seethed with anger, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for someone to blame. He occasionally muttered under his breath, curses and accusations that were barely audible but clearly directed at me. I sat in the gallery, watching them, feeling a strange mixture of emotions: anger, sadness, and a sense of closure. I had waited so long for this moment, for justice to be served, for the truth to be revealed. And now it was finally here. The jury deliberated for hours, their decision hanging in the balance, the tension in the courtroom thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, they returned, their faces grim, their verdict sealed. The judge read the charges, one by one, and with each count the word guilty echoed through the room, shattering my parents' remaining hopes. My mother burst into tears, her body racked with sobs, while my father remained stoic, his face a mask of defiance. The judge sentenced them to the maximum penalty, a lengthy prison term that would effectively end their lives as they knew them. As the bailiffs led them away, my mother turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and despair. She screamed my name, accusing me of destroying her life, of betraying her love, of being a monster. I simply stared back at her, my face expressionless, my heart empty. The media frenzy that followed the trial was intense. My parents' faces were plastered across every newspaper and television screen, their crimes dissected and analyzed, their lives turned into a cautionary tale. Their friends and associates abandoned them, their social circle vanished, their reputation in ruins. The political establishment distanced itself from my mother's lover, the disgraced politician, who was now facing his own legal troubles. My father's gambling debts were exposed, revealing a network of shady lenders and underworld figures who were now demanding repayment. Their carefully constructed world had crumbled, revealing the rot beneath the surface. They were no longer untouchable. They were exposed, vulnerable, and facing the full consequences of their actions. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a mixture of satisfaction and regret swirling within me. I had achieved my revenge, but it had come at a cost. I had lost my family, my innocence, and a part of myself in the process. The book I wrote became a bestseller, a story of betrayal, resilience, and the pursuit of justice. It resonated with readers around the world, inspiring others who had been victimized, showing them that they could overcome adversity, that they could find their voice, that they could reclaim their lives. I received countless letters and emails from people who had been touched by my story, who had found hope and inspiration in my journey. I used the proceeds from the book to establish a foundation dedicated to helping victims of abuse and injustice, providing them with legal assistance, counseling, and support. I wanted to turn my pain into purpose, to make a difference in the world, to prevent others from suffering the same fate that I had. Years passed. My parents remained in prison, their lives a stark contrast to the opulent world they had once inhabited. They aged prematurely, their bodies weakened by illness and their spirits broken by despair. I visited them occasionally, not out of obligation, but out of a sense of curiosity, wanting to see if they had changed, if they had learned anything from their mistakes. But they remained the same, bitter, resentful, and unrepentant. They blamed me for their misfortunes, refusing to acknowledge their own culpability. They clung to their lies, their delusions, and their hatred. I eventually stopped visiting, realizing that there was no point in trying to reach them. They were lost, consumed by their own darkness, beyond redemption. Silas's memory lived on, his kindness and generosity inspiring me to live a life of purpose and compassion. I honored his legacy by continuing his philanthropic work, supporting the causes he had championed, and helping those in need. I found love again, a true and lasting love with someone who appreciated me for who I was, who supported my dreams, and who stood by me through thick and thin. I built a new family, a family based on love, trust, and mutual respect. I had finally found peace, happiness, and a sense of belonging. They lost everything, I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet, it's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.